Hi, so today is more like an overview of what's going on around the world, a snapshot in a very short space of time of 10 minutes. The slides are packed with information that you are free to look at afterwards. So this will be a very fly through, 8 shots of what's going on around the world. Next slide. On urban water security. And by water security, we basically mean access to good quality water or sufficient quantity for both humans and nature itself, and ensuring that the socioeconomic development is achieved, but nature also has water, and we protect the nature itself while we take water for our own needs. Next slide. So basically, three key elements of achieving urban water security is ensuring access to safe and sufficient drinking water for humans at an affordable cost, protection of livelihoods, human rights and cultural and recreational values, and also preserving and protecting ecosystems, making sure that human health is also sustained while at the same time the ecosystems remain healthy and actually provide us with future ecosystem services for not just ourselves, but for future generations as well. Next slide. So in this context of my session, I'm looking at two aspects of how to achieve urban water security. We've got demand management, managing too little water, and then followed by green infrastructure. And so basically it's a very snapshot of, this is just the demand management side of actually implementing demand management around the world. What are people doing? So we talked about pricing a lot today. So water pricing, we see that Sydney's new flexible water pricing scheme has been approved in July of this year. Basically, the pricing schedule is based around dam levels. So as a dam level is decreased, the price increases. Sydney's been in a very long drought. So we've had forest fires, bushfires, which have actually, the sediments got into the water reservoirs as well. So they've been having quite a struggling time on top of the COVID. So basically, water pricing, looking at a more innovative way of how to actually, connect what's happening on the ground, what's happening in that environment to the demand itself. Next slide. And then we have looking at grants. So we have a lot of fiscal tools available for demand management, and one particularly used more in North America is a grant. So in New York City, they've got a grant for on-site water reuse systems. What's novel about this is not simply a grant just for on-site water reuse system in the building itself, but actually developers can combine across the district or across a few buildings and actually build whole on-site water reuse system for multiple buildings at the district level. This is for on-site non-potable use, so the on-site water reuse systems can be used for flushing toilets, washing sidewalks, streets and buildings, laundries, etc., irrigation systems. And basically, what's interesting about New York City is that it has one of the largest unfiltered water systems in the world, and in North America itself. And they have multi-year, abilities, but you can never be too, you have to always be cautious. And so they're moving into this on-site, which is, the regulatory system has been put down for this to be able to happen. So a lot of countries, this is very highly restricted. For instance, some European countries, there's huge barriers to being able to implement water reuse systems, and some countries are only just starting to think about it. Next slide. And looking at regulations, we always talk about, silos, and, water is always in the silo with energy and silo and food. What Boston has actually done is created a building energy reporting and disclosure ordinance that basically says all medium and large buildings in Boston have to report the energy and water usage. And every 5 years, they have to complete a major action to reduce basically a water energy nexus itself. And to be open and transparent about this, they've enabled this information to be put on a database. So the citizens can look at the database and see what buildings are doing and what the owners are doing and what the developers are doing. But also importantly is that building owners can then compare the energy and water usage of the other buildings. So then when it comes to facility managers or they're looking at, or investors, they can see which buildings are more, higher returns, rate of returns, for example. And also by putting it into the public information, it kind of puts pressure on, laggards to really step up and meet this new ordinance. And also there's also a competition because, developers and building owners, they want to outdo another building or example, or one company wants to outperform another. So there's always a little incentives here. And more interesting, just a pure regulation of this, you must achieve this much savings by this year. This puts it down to the public to create like role models as well. So buildings, the owners are kind of competing with each other. Next slide. And then we talk about smart meters, it's all the big thing around the world. So in San Francisco has actually up to 96% of all their customers actually have smart meters installed now. And what's really great is that the water utility can notify customers when they have leakage. And that's defined as 3 days of non-stop 24/7 use. That could be becoming a plumbing leak, for example, or someone just leaving a tap on, but at least the owner is told there's a leakage. And then customers can then log into their My Account and they can download their detailed daily and monthly water usage and learn ways of conserving water. They're also able to receive leak alerts, phones, emails, text messages on the dates of a leakage, the continuous, the actual amount itself. And when we look at the silos, like, our energy, you can log into your energy and see your daily consumption. So the energy sector is well more advanced than the water sector. So sometimes I feel like it's like dragging us into the 21st century and, bringing us up to a level of, what the energy sector already provides its customers. Just as a personal note, I can, here I can log into my account. I can see, energy usage of different times of the day, and I can see my heat map to show more intense during the days. That would be amazing one day if we have visibility in the water sector. I think one of the issues is that the pricing is always so low in water that if it was as high as energy, of course we'd have all those fancy technologies. So one of the, we have to find this really careful, way forward without charging too much, but also providing services which enable cities to become more resilient with future climatic extremes. Next slide. And, product labeling, this is really big in Europe, obviously, the labeling schemes. There's a Blue Angel in Germany and eco-labels in the Scandinavian countries. So as a mandatory label scheme in New Zealand, this covers products and it just basically shows what water efficiency is for a product and what the water consumption level is for that particular product. It applies to washing machines and dishwashers, the usual things that most US EPA covers as well. Has a star rating, so basically it's relative to water efficiency. The more stars, the better, more water efficient it is. And also the product label will tell you, could be telling you, water flow levels, etc. And labeling schemes always have to be, they have to be informative, they have to stand out, they have to be seen by customers to really take note of these things. And sometimes, I haven't got an example here, but sometimes, water utilities or cities will actually provide, a grant or a rebate for if you purchase like a high efficient product, you'll receive a rebate on this particular item. So this labeling scheme in particular is mandatory, and basically the key to this, regulatory scheme is to keep it simple because not everyone is a water resource management professional. The simple customer needs to see what it is. And the overall objective naturally is to remove unsustainable products from the marketplace eventually via market forces rather than having the government just put down, regulations. But then other places, Singapore actually says, okay, any product that's labeled, like say 1 star, is not allowed to be sold on the market. You can actually do it that kind of way as well. So eventually, or you can make it all new developments or renovations of apartments, etc., must have installed, 5 out of 6 labeled washing machines and fixtures. So there's different ways of implementing regulations here. Next slide. And now we're looking at, managing too much water. Green infrastructure, water-sensitive urban design, blue-green infrastructure, very different, different names, same thing. We're just managing water, too much water, how to improve water quality, how to, mitigate against climatic extremes in cities, how do you prevent localized flooding, and then the main thing is, what are the interesting ways of implementing green infrastructure in the cities? So next slide. So in Milwaukee, this is all obviously before every riots and things went crazy, and and budgets were there and things like that. So one of the things that they managed to implement was a stormwater fee reduction, basically. Very simple, that they've got a stormwater fee for the amount of surface water on impervious surfaces on their properties. And if the owner of a development implements green infrastructure, they receive a 60% discount off the stormwater fee. And it's reduced only to 60% to ensure that operation and maintenance costs are covered in the system. One of it, we always talk about command and control versus market-based instruments. And this is basically letting the customer decide what type of green infrastructure they would prefer or is more appropriate for their property type, rather than having the top-heavy, government coming down telling you must have this, this, and this, and this. So this drives innovation. It drives, incentivizes, new ways of doing things, but while also mandating, that you must do it. If there is an ability without having to mandate it. So the market forces are put into play here. Next slide. And then we turn to Europe. We know Amsterdam is leading the way quite often in green roofs. They have a subsidy that provides green roofs based on the surface area. They're also moving into green walls and green facades, etc. Capped at 20,000 euros is awarded to individual projects. I believe, this is quite an innovative, thing for a European city, because quite often the European cities, you're very generalized here, do not use subsidies and other fiscal tools if they do it very sparingly and the budgets are very tight. We often see in North America and to a lesser extent Australia relying on subsidies and grants to really get the consumer and customer to do something they want. So this was an example that stood out to me, and what is amazing is it's been since 2010, and it's quietly pushing away because chugging forward to where you get the most of attention on Rotterdam. But Amsterdam is like, here we are, we actually do something. So that's quite a nice thing to also see, that the two cities drive each other, compete. Obviously, Rotterdam has their new green roof subsidy they've implemented. They've developed one for this year, that continues even though the situation. So next slide. Awards and recognition schemes are also a very important tool, because it creates role models and people emulate people they look up to. And so this one was basically Kansas City created a KC Green Neighborhood Recognition Program. And it gave neighborhoods an ability to develop green infrastructure, implement sustainable practices, but also be rewarded for their initiatives they take. So that means the neighborhood could be, they will have their coverage of them in the local newspapers, on their cable channels, and they'll also have access to sustainability workshops and also these eco-gifts to reward neighborhoods that progress well towards sustainability. These awards and recognition programs can be done on individual levels. It could be done on young children or who are looking after neighborhood things. They have the Rain Guardian program in San Francisco. They have all these different types of ways of rewarding people. School projects examples, other examples. Basically, at the end of the day, it's creating a role model. So rather than the government or the city telling you what you need to do, you can look at your neighbor and think, hey, they're doing that, why aren't we doing this? And that creates another angle that you can address. You can create, this, you can almost create a demand for something by using, citizens to drive it themselves, rather than mandating and regulatories, command and control style. thing. Next slide. And then one of the interesting things is though that obviously, cities do need to take initiative and need to drive, the future and drive regulations, but also leadership. So what Melbourne's done is called the Green Your Lane pilot project. So they've taken, right away green lanes, and these lanes are usually, cafes and art and cultural things. So what they've done is they've greened them. And they chose it based on which lanes were to be done were chosen by the public. So they went in and greened these lanes, put green infrastructure in. And then what that does is creates almost a demonstration project. And that shows leadership to the people, to the city, to private businesses, that the city takes it seriously, and the city is actually showing what can be done, what's possible. And this is done in their public space in the right of ways. And then basically, very simple things, vertical greeneries and things to catch stormwater. Just more of a demonstration as what's possible in the future. And then obviously what your cities can do, regulatory powers can do, is then eventually, once it's shown to be viable and then the public demand it, then they can create a regulation, say, okay, we do this in the public right away, but we also mandate that in your private large properties that you must implement green infrastructure. So that sometimes these, you're developing a demand for something. So by the time you regulate it, the people want it, is what I'm basically saying. Next slide. And information and awareness, back to Australia again. So what they did was they had this green roofs and walls policy, and to increase the number of green roofs and walls, they've provided guidelines and inspirational guidelines and a resource manual to help residents and businesses implement green walls and other types of stormwater infrastructure. And then also to have a map to show, green infrastructure across the city and to show what projects are possible. And that creates, we see these resource maps often now. We see them water leakages, they put up where in the city where leaking water is. Green infrastructure, what sustainable businesses exist, we are the eco products and things like that. So by doing this, it then creates an incentive for people to show in their development that we're also doing something. So if you're a private owner, you're a facility manager or something of a private, corporation building, if you do that green infrastructure, you'll be able to put that up on a map and show your customers and your community that you're actually taking this seriously as well. So that drives this, this kind of circular thing. Instead of the city or the government telling you that you need to put up green walls, put out the guidelines, incentivize people to show what they're doing, show that to the city, to the residents, and then eventually, if you do want to regulate it, then the people will naturally say, well, why didn't we regulate it earlier? Why are we waited now? So it's kind of a good way. This is probably what we see in Australia is more of a in between Europe and America, where rather than relying on subsidies, grants, rebates, and fees, they kind of in between this, let the free market work itself, very light touch, and we can see that in Rotterdam, Amsterdam, Rotterdam, taking also that North American approach of saying, okay, we do already do that. We already show what's possible with greening the streets. So if they're introducing the whole, subsidies and rebate schemes itself. So that's the interesting part of it. And it's all down to get systems of governance as well, and histories and cultures. Next slide. Okay, so that's the end. So I packed huge amounts of information, very brief around the world. And you can feel free to connect with me on LinkedIn, visit the website. I'm an open connector, so anyone that wants to connect with me, I accept. So thank you very much for this.